Hello, my curious cats, and welcome back to another episode of the Say Psychology podcast, the podcast for all the info on psychology's most questionable history. I'm your host, Leslie Lopez, PhD student and psychology nerd. Now, when I say I'm a psychology nerd, I truly mean it. In case you guys haven't noticed, I am the ultimate psychology nerd. In fact, the reason I'm getting my PhD is because the ultimate goal is to be a psychology professor at a Hispanic serving institute. So the thing about me is I'm a nerd in many different subjects, not just psychology, and one subject that I find myself really intrigued by is conspiracy theories. I wouldn't exactly consider myself as a conspiracy theorist. I just find them fun, kind of fascinating, to the point where honestly I think I'm on a list. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised. Every once in a while, I will feel my phone vibrate, or I will hear it while I'm in the kitchen or something and my phone's in the living room. I will hear it vibrate. I will go over to my phone, look at it, and there's nothing there. Like the screen hasn't even blinked. That's how I know I'm being watched. I wouldn't be surprised if I end up on a list. I have nothing to hide. Okay, most of my funky research comes from my research that I do for this podcast. Sue me. Entertainment purposes. But anyways, conspiracy theories. One that I really subscribe to, that I'll be honest, I truly believe, is that we have already found the cure to cancer. And the reason that we are not exposing that cure to the world is because of Big Pharma. Because let's be honest, how much money goes into Big Pharma just for cancer research? How much of that money would be lost if we expose the cure to cancer to the world? Sadly, it is a terrible thing to even consider, but it's one that I truly believe. But on that note, the other day, I was, just on the little Google machine, just looking up any advances, in cancer research that we could have had lately. It's, I like to stay up to date with medical research as much as possible. And I came upon this case that we're going to talk about today about Dr. Chester Southam. And when I tell you, I have never heard of this case. I literally have never heard of this case, and it intrigued me to the point where even though it's not psychology or psychiatry based, it's more medical field based. It's kind of the same realm, but I told myself I need to make a whole episode on this. So sit tight, because today we are learning about Dr. Chester Southam, the medical doctor who caused cancer on purpose in patients, all in the name of medicine. So if you're a little bit insane in the membrane like me, get cozy and let's jump into it. His name was Dr. Chester Milton Southam. My cousin's dog name is Chester. He's just the cutest little mini schnauzer. Okay, but Dr. Southam was born October 4th, 1919, a Libra. I love me a Libra, probably because my moon is in Libra. Now, when I say there is little known about his earlier life, believe me, I have scrubbed my internet far and wide for information on his earlier life, but have failed to find such. What little information I was able to collect is that he earned his bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Idaho, and eventually his medical degree from Columbia University, and matched in residency at the New York Presbyterian Hospital in 1947. He quickly rose through the medical ranks and received his first promotion in 1948 as attending physician for cancer, and quickly earned his second promotion in less than a year to full member at the Chief Division of Virology and Immunology. In 1951, he was promoted yet again to full-time professor at Cornell University. Yes, he was a smart cookie, there's no denying that, there's absolutely no denying it, but also this is the 1950s-ish, so the bar for medical research was only so high at the point. I'm not discrediting him in any way possible. I'm just saying this was a different time, before ethical standards were really a thing. Let's keep that in mind. Virology is the study of viruses, and immunology is the study of medicine that studies the immune system, its components, and its functions. Dr. Chester was immersed in his studies between the biology of the immune system and the viruses that affect it, specifically the study of cancer and cancer cells. Although cancer isn't typically considered an immune disorder, it is influenced by the immune system. Cancer cells arise from the mutations in normal cells, which can evade the immune system's surveillance mechanisms. As a result, cancer cells can grow and spread without being detected or destroyed. Since the early 1950s, Southam was fascinated with the study of cancer cells. He began his career by proposing multiple projects to study them. The thing about medical testing in the 1950s was that human experimentation was legal under certain circumstances, as we have learned and seen. He started off by heading over to the continent of Africa in the early 1950s, where he tested the West Nile virus as a potential viral therapy. Viro as in virus. He injected the West Nile virus into over 100 cancer patients who had terminal cancer and little to no treatment options. The goal was to research to see if he could train the West Nile virus to kill cancer without the side effects of chemotherapy. Supposedly, more like debatably, the research had some good results, but the side effect was that some of the participants, more like victims, ended up with a severe case of the West Nile virus. As if these victims didn't already have enough on their plate with an incurable disease such as cancer, but now they have the West Nile virus, which has purposefully and intentionally been injected into them. All in the name of medicine. Obviously, this all sounds terrible, right? Like to a normal person. But to a doctor in the 1950s, no. Dr. Southam came back to the U.S. even more determined than ever to study possible cures for cancer. From the mid-1950s all the way through the mid-1960s, Southam conducted clinical research on patients/victims without their informed consent, in which he injected cancer cells into their skin to see if their immune system would reject the cancer cells or if the cells would grow. These experiments were conducted on patients under his care and under the care of others, including the U.S. prison system. Although the concept of informed consent was still pretty unheard of at the time, and there were a number of loopholes around the little bit that was upheld, the number one way around it was opposing or speaking out about a piece of questionable research. In other words, just don't make it obvious to the patients/victims. So what Dr. Chester and his team of researchers did was they, quote, avoided the phobia and ignorance that surrounds the word cancer. They did so by not telling the patients/victims that they were going to get cancer cells specifically injected into them, but rather, quote, they were getting human cells growing in test tubes, which isn't technically wrong. You see what they did there? Dr. Southam took a trip to the Ohio Penitentiary at Columbus, where he confronted 53 convicted felons. Felons with charges ranging from murderers, bank robbers, embezzlers, and check forgers. The inmate was called by name and walked upstairs to a room equipped as a surgical station. Which, okay, little piece of side note. Let me put a little psychology into this. Okay, let me get my psychology glasses on here. The fact that these inmates were called by name is not just a coincidence. If you know anything about the prison system, is that inmates are known by their numbers or last names at the most. The fact that they were called up by full government name was a way to make them feel more at ease, make them feel like they actually mattered. So as a way to put them at ease about the whole situation. To Dr. Southam, they were a human with a name, not just an inmate with a number. There's that psychology mindfuck, okay? It's not mentioned anywhere, but when you've been studying psychology for as long as I have, you start to pick up on the little things that aren't so little. But anyways, Southam and his team brought the inmate into the fluorescent sterilized room. There, the inmates sat down and presented one bare arm like one does when getting their blood drawn. First, Dr. Southam used Novocaine for anesthesia on an area about 3 inches square across. Into the middle of that 3-inch square, he stuck a tattoo needle that left a little blue dot as a reference point. Out of a vial into a hypodermic syringe, he drew up a cubic centimeter of pink fluid. Pink like my nails. I just got them done, by the way, so if you see a lot of hand gestures, that's why. Okay. This pink fluid consisted of mostly water, but did contain millions of cancer cells from innocent human victims to the disease. These cells had been grown for years in test tubes for this exact purpose. Southam inserted the point of the needle alongside the tattoo mark and worked it up the arm for 1.5 inches just under the skin. A push on the plunger injected half the shot, so about 3 to 5 million cancer cells, into the inmate's arm. Dr. Southam then pulled out the needle, turned it around, and repeated the process just a little bit lower down the arm. Sadly, for many of the 53 inmates, it was just a one-time shot. As any well-conducted study, there has to be variable variance. In this case, of the 53 subjects, 27 received the injection the once, 15 twice, and 11 thrice, also known as 3-shot veterans. Groups 1 and 2 both received the same treatment. The 3-time veterans, on the other hand, had a little bit of a different experience. For their first 2 injection sessions, they received the same batch of cancer cells as the 2 other groups. Their 3rd session, however, contained something a little bit different. The 3rd batch was still of cancer cells, just not 100% human cancer cells. These 3-time veterans received human cancer cells that had been genetically mutated and grown in animal embryos. The blobs of fluid containing these special cancer cells made little bumps on each inmate's arms in a matter of days or even hours for some. These bumps swelled up, becoming tender and inflamed. The healthy body's natural defenses were doing overtime right in front of the naked eye. In some cases, the inmates felt no discomfort and the swelling disappeared, albeit this was a little bit more common within the 1st and 2nd group than it was among the 3rd. But this showed, nonetheless, that the body's natural defenses had worked just as effectively, but less conspicuously. At the end of the study, which lasted about 8 weeks total, all the inmates returned to the lab one more time, where an actual surgeon by the name of Dr. Arthur D.G. James from the Ohio State College of Medicine injected Novocaine about 1.5 inches below the tattoo mark and made a nice little incision about 1 inch long across the arm. He folded the skin back, then cut out a little goblet of flesh. All these biopsy specimens were flown to New York for further study. It was found that for some, all cancer cells had vanished within a week. For others, a few straggling surviving cancer cells were still detected. Now, remember how earlier I mentioned Dr. Southam injected the inmates twice per session? The 2nd injection just a little bit lower on the arm? Now, did you notice how I only mentioned the surgeon making 1 incision? That's because the 2nd injection site was left for observation over a longer period of time. Except there was no observation over a longer period of time. The research team took their current results and never came back. According to Southam, his team of researchers, there was no need to come back because all the inmates seemed fine, just fine. And the 2nd injection spot just disappeared spontaneously in the maximum of a month time after the experiment. Just poof, just vanished. The cancer just vanished. I often find myself, when I'm researching these episodes, having to constantly remind myself that this was the 1950s to mid-1960s, okay? Like, a lot of this was happening, like, psychology, medical experiments, human experiments, a lot of this was happening during Cold War time, a time where ethics did not go hand in hand with human experiments. However, Dr. Southam wasn't completely in the clear, if you could even call it that. He was never actually prosecuted, but he did receive a 1-year probation period from any further experiments and a 1-year suspension of his medical license. Not because why he did was unethical, but because of his lack of informed consent. So basically, if he had been truthful with the inmates and told them point blank what he was injecting into their body, he would have been 100% in the clear. It's so bad because that 1 year did nothing to his career, and I mean nothing. Okay, in the mid-1960s, after his license was reinstated, Dr. Chester Southam was elected president of the American Association for Cancer Research. He then went on to be a renowned tenured professor of oncology at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital until he retired in the late 1970s. Obviously, breaching many codes of medical ethics was not an impediment to career advancements in the 1960s. My gosh, you guys, we've been cooked since the start. What can I say? 30 years later, in the 1990s, Southam remained convinced that his research was both sound and scientifically important to cancer research. He was unwavering in his belief that none of the patients/inmates/victims who were injected with cancer cells would actually contract the disease. An interviewer once asked him, "What if they did contract the disease?" And Dr. Southam answered with, quote, "If they did, we'd just cut it out." Well, my curious cats, thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Not much of a happy ending. It's kind of starting to become a pattern on this channel. Have you noticed? But that's medical and psychology history for ya. If you enjoyed today's episode, please remember to like, subscribe, follow, and share on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, and Apple Podcasts. As always, citations will be in the description if you want to check those out. Stay blessed, stay safe, and stay psyched. I love you. Bye.